Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.
Hello and welcome to the Throw-In Independent.ie's GA podcast in association with Allianz. I'm Will Slattery, delighted to be back for another season with Michael Verney. Michael, welcome back.
How are you? Well, it feels like we were never gone.
I know. Well, I don't know. Absence makes the heart go fonder, Michael. I feel like I haven't seen you since our last podcast.
Familiarity breeds contempt.
Exactly. Yeah, by the end of it, we're ready for a nice little decompression period. How have you been? Have you been keeping well, I hope?
Good, yeah. Busy weekend there, actually. Just between, got up much to fight at like 5:30 on Sunday morning, went training at 11 o'clock, drove up to Crow Park to cover the games then as well, so I'm fairly sleep deprived now at this stage.
Yeah, I didn't get the car locked in any car parks this time.
No,
that was the highlight, I think, of our first year together as co-hosts. Your great tale of being locked, he's living in Limerick over
Yeah, just stay tuned for our league diaries throughout the year. There's always something interesting that happens, alright, yeah.
So what did you get up to in the off-season? What does Michael Verney do in the GA off-season?
I was away, actually. I was away at the Melbourne Cup working, and I went to...
Working with quote marks, was it?
In inverted commas, yeah. I was in Vegas on a stag before that. Went straight from there to LA, from there to Melbourne, and from there to New Zealand.
Because I saw there was a photo of you with a horse, and you're wearing a very kind of floral, kind of one of your patented. Usually, you save these outfits for GA photo calls around the podcast, but you.
I was staying in a hotel in Melbourne, which was connected to the largest casino in the Southern Hemisphere. So every time I was going back to my hotel room, I used to visit the casino. So I had a particularly good morning there one day, and I had a load of cash, and I was like, "What am I going to do with this? I'm not going to give this back to these lads." So I went up and bought a new suit. Yeah, so at least I have something to show. Yeah. And that horse as well is an unbelievable horse. Sub-Zero is the name of the horse. Won the Melbourne Cup in the early 90s and has raised about 10 or 15 million for charity. He's like an inspiration. He goes around and visits,
like Bob Geldof,
kind of visits sick kids and stuff like that, and they just seem to light up when they see the horse. It's mad. And Hugh Jackman actually rode the horse Sub-Zero down the casino, the Crown Casino that I was in, and they raised like $1 million as well. Yeah,
that's brilliant. How was Vegas?
Wild. Yeah. It's good.
I won't ask you any follow-ups. It sounds like,
No, you won't get any here. Maybe the unedited version. Maybe. No, it's good. Yeah, good off season. Busy now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the National League just around the corner. We're going to be joined by Vincent, Hogan, and Colm to discuss it all and the club finals in just a minute. Anything in particular that you're looking forward to? Are you looking forward to being back on the road every weekend covering league matches?
Yeah, I suppose, and we'll probably go into it with the lads. Just the amount of new managers that are in place in hurling and football. You obviously have Dessie Farrell with Dublin, you have Banty with Monaghan, Porrick, Joyce, you have Shane O'Neill in Galway,
Joe Brawley with Ayr.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we must get him on. One of this to talk about that actually. But the league is probably going to be a funny one this year because I'm not sure how gung ho teams will be going forward. Just because, particularly in the hurling, it's basically a kind of a dry run for what's coming in the provincial championships. But a lot of interesting games coming up. It's going to be every weekend is going to be a different kind of several different subplots. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, yeah, that's my favourite thing about the league. Even though ultimately it doesn't have a huge bearing in terms of a lot of teams get it right for the championship or put more focus on the championship, we still in the media do react. Like every Monday we do go like really gung ho about various. Yeah. Like Dessie Farrell, will be in the firing line if they don't have a strong start, in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, GA fans are great because they cannot see past the last result. Yeah. It's the last result is everything is based on if there's ever a case of you're only as good as your last, it's within the GA, and then if you're winning, you're on top of the world, and if you lose, there's question marks hanging over this lad or whatever. So that's a great and an awful thing about the GA.
Well, now we'll kick off our Allianz League preview with Vincent Hogan and Colm Keys. Thanks so much for coming in, guys.
Thanks, Will.
But before we get into that, we're going to discuss Colm yesterday's club hurling and football finals. I know you were in a very cold Croke Park for what was a pretty exciting day overall. I know the football game took a while to heat up, but then there were a couple of flashpoints as we headed into extra time. But to start with the hurling as well, you had Brendan Maher on one side, TJ Reid on the other side, two talismanic figures, playing really good hurling. There was a lot of emotion in the air with what both clubs have been through. Ultimately, Ballyhale now kind of cement themselves as probably the premier club hurling side possibly ever. But as an occasion, what did you make of it?
Very enjoyable match. First of all, there was obviously the final was prefaced by the tragedy that both clubs have suffered over the last 18 months. Borrisolay in particular have endured a lot of death and tragedy linked to them, and obviously Henry Shefflin referenced the two guys that should have been there. So from that point of view, there was poignancy there. It was also the first Tipperary-Kilkenny All-Ireland club final, hurling final, which seems strange given the fact that they've contested 6 of the last 11, we say, since 2009. So you would have expected that, but Tipperary clubs have a very, very poor record of reaching All-Ireland club finals. And indeed, Borrisolay hadn't even won a Munster or a Tipperary title since their previous one back in the 80s. So, but how they drove on and how they really went at Ballyhale really impressed me, because I thought Ballyhale would have it pretty much their own way now. But with Brendan Maher again outstanding in the second half. And I have to say, while TJ Reid is, and we'll probably discuss him in detail after, Brendan Maher's campaign for his club, I don't think I've ever seen anything as pronounced as what he has done over the last 3 matches between the Munster final against Ballygunner and then his exceptional performance in Limerick the last day against St Thomas's. And while it took him a while to get going yesterday, I thought second half, particularly when he pushed up forward and Dan McCormack moved back, and between them, that's the way they've been operating. But I just thought a second half, the way he drove them on again, it's just been an incredible campaign from. Obviously, he's come out on the losing side, and when they did get close yesterday, it was, of course, TJ Reid who stepped up with a point, and then he won a free, just by sheer force of nature. He won a free to put himself in a position to put over the score, and you knew then his intervention, once again, whether it's with Ballyhale or whether it's Kilkenny, he just always comes up with these big plays, these big moments to turn a game, and you knew that Borrisolay's chance had gone, and that was TJ Reid once more.
Yeah, Vincent, it's kind of fitting that Henry Shefflin was on the sidelines kind of watching TJ Reid again write another chapter in this illustrious career, which at this stage is probably threatening to maybe overtake Henry, if not in terms of honours and medals won, maybe on-field performance.
Yeah, I think we're at the stage now where we can describe TJ Reid as borderline ridiculous, what he's doing. Agree with everything that Colm has just said. And I think the problem for Borrisolay was when you have, at club level, a forward line with the central spine of Colm Fennelly and TJ Reid, you inevitably feel you've got to put an extra man back there. And so what we saw in the first half, when, Brendan Maher has probably been the best man marker in hurling in the last year. So it was inevitable Borrisolay would use him back there, with Dan McCormack supplementing the defence. So we didn't really see Brendan Maher flowing until the second half when they had to chase the game. And I think the key moment probably was JD Devaney when he went for goal just approaching half-time. It was an easy point if he took it. He's only 18. Rush of blood to the head. A 2-point game would have been a great situation for Borrisolay going in. Instead, they went straight down, and I think it was TJ got a point. Suddenly, it's a 4-point game. But it's just an incredible story for both clubs, really. You had, the GA, I think, put a box aside for the Owen Doyle's family and Eugene Aylward's family, the two lads who lost their lives in Ballyhale in the last year. And, Henry spoke quite eloquently about the two of them and the impact on the dressing room. But you've got to bear in mind, Borrisolay came from nowhere really to be in this All-Ireland. And even in the Tipperary Championship, like in the quarter-final, they beat Drummond by 2 points. They beat Killerwan in the semi-final by 1 point. They beat Killadangan in the final by 3 points. It was just pure character that transported Borrisolay into that All-Ireland. Nobody expected it. We had a strange situation in Tipperary this year where I think for the first time in 47 years the 4 semi-finalists were all from the north. And that's the difficulty for Borrisolay, that this was a chance they may not get again, because it's going to be so competitive even in the north tip side of the championship next year. But they were heroic because, really without Jerry Kelly, JD Devaney didn't score. Conor Kenny, their co-captain, didn't score. Conor Kenny, who's been magnificent, got 6 points from play against the Glen in the Munster final and just got on a lot of ball but couldn't find his scoring range. if you were told the start of the game Jerry Kelly would get 7 points from play, you'd have said Borrisalee are nailed on here. It just didn't happen for them, but they were heroic to still be in it right at the finish.
Yeah, Michael, we'll give you the last word on the hurling decider. And what jumped out to you? You know, Vincent and Colm have listed some interesting storyline subplots there, but anything in particular that you enjoyed yesterday?
Just to piggyback on what the lads were saying about TJ, they were 2 up, and I forget who got the ball around maybe 50 yards out from where Ballyhale, the goal they were shooting into at the Davin end, and there was 2 lads looking for the ball off him, and one of them was TJ, and he literally just jumped in front of his teammate, I can't remember who it was, and just took total responsibility. That just seems to be what he does when the need is greatest. He always seems to step up, and just mentioned about that he's vying with Henry Shefflin, probably is one of the greatest hurlers of all time. I think the admirable thing, and maybe it wasn't the case with Ballyhale yesterday, is with Kilkenny. He's playing with a much weaker team and just keeps delivering every single time. It was a brilliant final from what the lads have talked about there as well. So much tragedy for the 2 clubs. I thought Borrisalee were unbelievable. They just kept hanging in there like they've been hanging in all year. Jerry Kelly, particularly in the opening 20 minutes, was just like he scored their first 4 points. He got a line ball, which was an outrageous score as well. It was a fitting end to what's been a remarkable hurling club championship.
And what about the football championship then? Finn came in as very heavy favourites against Kilcoo, and then it developed into quite a strange first half anyway. You know, we didn't get any. He scored, I think, 3 points to 2 at half time to Kilcoo. Finn were being talked about as, their free-flowing style. Now, Joe Brawley had written a good bit in the build-up about how great they were to watch, but they were down in the trenches all day, and they kind of did whatever they had to do to get over the line. I know they did catch fire in extra time, but long periods where they were more than happy to maybe play it quite cynically, I would say.
Yeah. You play your free-flowing style when you get the opportunity and when the opportunity arises, but there are sometimes when you just have to do what you have to do. They didn't score in the first 24 minutes yesterday, and after Jason Leonard's, I think, free in the 48th minute, the game was blown up in the 72nd minute. They didn't score for another 24 minutes, and then in extra time they hit 1-4 in 10 minutes, which was equal to what they had scored in the previous 70 minutes that had preceded that. But they did what they had to do. Kind of going in, I don't know about anyone else, but going in at full time and with all the ruckus that happened down the tunnel, you're just thinking, Jesus, it looks like everything is with Kilcoo almost. That, they were kind of just bouncing, and they were the ones kind of, bouncing going in at the end of full time. And then Corofin came out and was 1-4 without reply. Didn't even let Kilcoo get on the board in extra time. We're all used to the champagne football, but there's sometimes you just have to do what they did yesterday, and it wasn't particularly nice at times. But there's not going to be an asterisk beside the 3 in a row that's saying this wasn't their best display of all time.
Yeah, and Vincent, as you said with Borrisalee, they mightn't get the chance again. Similarly with Kilcoo, when you have a team like Corofin who don't score for the last 20 odd minutes, 25 minutes, they'll look back on it, even with 14 men, with a lot of regret. Yeah,
but in fairness to Kilcoo, I don't think anyone can take huge issue with their tactics yesterday. When you think of what Corofin did to Nemo Rangers, what they did to Dr. Crokes, if you try to play that Corofin team in a shootout, you have no hope in my view. They're just such a phenomenal team. But what yesterday told me was we can get evangelical almost about the style of football that teams play, and Joe tended to do that about Corofin, and he's done it about Dublin. But the great teams find a way. And we saw it with Dublin, how cynical they could be against Mayo in an All-Ireland final a few years ago, where Dean Rock scored that late free, and the way Dublin closed down Mayo's attempts to restart the game. And that's what great teams do. And I think Kevin O'Brien, the Corofin manager, said it. We can win it either way. We can grind it out, or we can play that champagne football if the opposition want to play that kind of football. I think that's a sign of greatness, actually, what they did yesterday.
If you take one of the great modern-day forwards, one of the great modern-day players, Peter Canavan, his last act for Tyrone was to drag down Colm Cooper in the closing stages of the 2005 All-Ireland final. No one will remember Peter Canavan's career for that. They'll remember him for just what I said, being one of the great modern-day forwards, one of the greatest players ever. And just as Vincent referenced, if you look back at the closing stages of some of the All-Ireland finals that Dublin have played in this decade, and you look at the 2013 All-Ireland final and how Dublin players hacked down Mayo players as they were protecting a lead. Again, in that epic 2016 All-Ireland semi-final, there were Kerry players pulled down. And again in 2017, same thing happened. But Dublin won't be remembered for that. That side was there when it had to be there. And it was the same with Corofin yesterday. It won't take anything away from the fact that they are now, numerically and stylistically and everything, the greatest club team there has been. They've won 3 in a row. That's a cycle. That's 3 12-month cycles repeatedly. They went into January the previous year. Dr. Crokes beat them in an All-Ireland semi-final. When you think of the consistent cycle, and Galway's a tough championship. They have drawn their last 2 county finals. They drew against Tuam this year. I was actually at that game. I thought they dug it out, but they were kind of lucky to get there. I thought Tuam might just have got that in the end. They weren't the better team, Tuam, but they had the opportunity. They were very, very well placed.
It's also worth remembering, Colm, this is a village with a population of about 600 people. To be 3 times in a row All-Ireland champions is extraordinary. As you say, in a really competitive Galway championship, to dig their way out of... Did they draw the last 2, was it?
Yeah.
And won them in replays. This is an extraordinary story.
It's a sizable catchment area now. They do get a lot of players in, but again, it's just the nursery, it's the academy that they have, the way they produce their players, and a particularly good crop. I don't think there's any argument now that they are the greatest team. I mean, they've won All Ireland finals by 10, 15 and 12 points. And okay, yesterday's was a drop, but they still went on and won in extra time by 8 points. You know, playing the way they did, and very cynical too. But having said that, the way Kilcoo set up, it was a day for the trenches, and it reflects the scoreline over 90 minutes of play, and it's 112 to 0-7 in Croke Park. So that's the type of game you got. They're normally a good team to pick their way through. They're very astute to pick their way. They face a lot of these defences. Naturally, very few are going to go toe to toe with them. Kilcoo do that better than anyone. And I'd say what Vincent said about Borrisoleigh. I mean, Kilcoo have been to so many Ulster finals and have won so many down titles, and this was a great opportunity. And I'm sure coming down the tunnel at full time, I certainly thought they had a great chance. And then Corofin take off on that electrifying burst, 1-4 in 7 minutes, 7 points, equal to what they scored in the previous 70 or 71 minutes, and it was over. Yeah,
it took them a while, but they found the shooting boots in the air. We'll move on to the Allianz League preview now, Michael, starting with football. And I guess, we were kind of chatting a bit beforehand that you'd never know quite how each team will kind of set up or take the league, but with Dublin, we have a very interesting kind of changing of the guard with Dessie Farrell coming in, Kerry first up in Croke Park. How interested are you to see if there's anything new that Dessie Farrell tries to bring, or even how he copes with, taking on this massive job?
Yeah, it's the story of the league, really, and it's probably going to be the story of the year. Just the transition from Jim Gavin to Dessie Farrell. It'll be interesting to see. Like you're asking, are there going to be new things? There has to be new things. There's going to be new faces. There's going to be new techniques. We still don't know his backroom team yet, do we? We still don't know. We don't know whether it'll be the same type of style of play that we're going to see. So there's an awful lot of questions to be answered, and it's great to have probably Kerry coming to town in the first game as well, because it starts off with a bit of a bang, and you know how fickle the GA world is as well. Like if Kerry are to win the first game, and then you have people, there's not a negativity, but you know how
a trip to Castlebar week 2 as well, and where Dublin haven't lost to Mayo since 2012.
So they never lost under Jim Gavin to Mayo as well. So it'll be interesting. It'll be very hard to hit the ground running, but I'm sure he'll want to, and he'll feel the need to. So that's going to illuminate the whole league run, basically how Dublin under Dessie Farrell start out.
Yeah, Vincent, because obviously Dessie will ultimately judge by the Ireland Championship, but how important do you think it is to get off to a good start in a couple of when you're playing your massive rivals early doors? Is it important for him to get a win early on in the first 2 matches?
I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what store Dublin supporters are putting on league performance. They lost three of their matches under Jim Gavin last year, didn't make the final, and yet we saw them certainly taken to a replay by Kerry in the All-Ireland. But Dessie's going to be judged on the All-Ireland, and he knows that. He's not going to be judged on whether they get to a league final, or the retention of the Leinster Championship is almost a given. He knows that he's got to have his ducks in order come July, and they're just back from holiday. Cluxton is obviously out until March. but Evan Comerford has been in plenty of league matches as of now. I don't think Desi will be feeling the pinch if they don't get off to a flyer, because I think what we saw last year is that Dublin don't have to have an outstanding league to be in perfect shape for the championship.
But I guess it is easier to take that approach to the league when you're Jim Gavin with 4 All-Irelands in the bag already in a row, whereas Desi's coming in as a new man. So it's not maybe quite as easy to say, oh, we'll just park the league and just really gear up to the championship, or is it?
Well, obviously there's scrutiny there, and it's always easier for a new manager when he's seeking to pick a team up off the floor rather than inheriting a team that's won 5 in a row. That's huge pressure, obviously, straight away, because the level of scrutiny and the comparison parallels are going to be there. But I have to say, next Saturday night's game, far greater imperative for Kerry to go and win it than Desi Farrell and Dublin. Kerry must start winning a few more games in Croke Park for a start, because their record over the last few years has been poor there, surprisingly poor. I think the All-Ireland semi-final against Tyrone has been their only win in their last 8 games. Now, they've drawn a few, including an All-Ireland final, and I think they'll benefit from college results over the weekend and last week as well, with Tralee and UCC gone. That should deliver a lot of players back. That'll take them out of the Sigerson net. So that bodes well for them, because it makes Sean O'Shea and David Clifford obviously available for the for the first round. So very important for Kerry, I think, to go and beat Dublin in Croke Park. Obviously, they beat them in the 2017 league final by a point, but they need to be doing it more consistently and winning it more consistently. And like Dublin, they start to need to find cover for defence. I think the two teams in that respect, what they're looking for out of the league, and I think ultimately Kerry can go on and win the league and go one step further than last year. But what they're looking for are marking defenders, because there's a little bit of a deficit for both. Dublin have probably, with the power of their play and their ability to move the ball and all of that, have been able to cope with that better. But to tie up a David Clifford, we saw how difficult it was for Dublin in last year's All-Ireland final replay. Almost an impossible task, but they're areas that I think that certainly need cover, and Kerry are the same. I don't think anyone will be too stressed if Dublin have a couple of defeats early on. I think it's, they are only back. New management still finding their feet. I think they'll be fine, and I agree with Vincent. July is when they really need to be clear about how they're playing. I don't think Desi will change much. I think and he was there at the time, his knowledge of the transition when the last All-Ireland winning Dublin team was handed on from Pat O'Neill and his management team to Mickey Whelan, there was striking change at that point in terms of philosophy, in terms of backroom, everything. I don't think we'll see those elements. I think continuity is what the players will want, and by and large I think that's what Desi Farrell will give, because large elements of the backroom team, maybe not the coaching team, but large elements of the backroom team will remain in place, so that there's a familiarity there and that they'll be able to keep going. But if they lost their first 2 matches, and maybe they won't, I think they can still go to Mayo and win, and obviously they can win next Saturday night too at home. But if they lost their first two matches, I don't think it'll be that big of an issue.
Yeah, Michael, if you think Desi Farrell coming in is the big storyline of the league, when you look around the other teams, like, what are you most intrigued to see or interested, or what team are you most kind of curious about what they might do?
Galway is probably the most interesting one. Again, another new face coming in. As icons go, they don't get much bigger than Pádraig Joyce. Obviously won the FBD league over the weekend as well. I thought it was interesting that he's given the captaincy to Shane Walsh, a player who some people would have made some very nice comparisons with to Joyce. He's been in and out. Nobody doubts his talent at all, but he's been in and out at different stages, particularly in big games over the last 4 or 5 years, and he's just entrusted him with the captaincy in the view or in the hope that he will get consistent performances from one of his best players. Like, he's literally a player that can light up the biggest occasions. So he's entrusted him a captaincy, which I think is interesting. Banty coming back in Monaghan is another interesting story as well. Malachy O'Rourke brought them unbelievably far. So there's just 2 new faces as well. But Joyce, to me, is particularly interesting because he came out straight away. There was a wave of optimism the minute he took the job. Then he did an interview with Galway FM again, and just people were beaming after. He's talking about the style of football they want to play. He's talking about All-Irelands and things like that. So he's brought the optimism that Kevin Walsh brought Galway very far, and I think he was unfairly criticised at times. They played a style of football maybe that wasn't maybe that attractive on the eye, but he made them very competitive, very difficult to beat. They got back to an All-Ireland semi-final, they got to a league final, they, I think 2 Connachts under his reign as well. But he's brought them far, and now people are hoping that Joyce can bring them a bit further. So that's one of the most interesting stories from the league for me.
Yeah, because stylistically, if he was to, bring in a more attacking style, I think that's what a lot of Galway supporters are probably crying out for, especially when you see the juxtaposition on occasion between Corofin and how they're playing. And
yeah, that's it, Will. I was just going to say that's the stick that was used to beat Kevin Walsh with over the years, that Kevin Walsh set up Galway to be very, very difficult to beat. But there was a sense that they were playing an almost robotic style of football. And then you look at Corofin when they were in full flow, and people were saying, well, that's so frustrating that we can't look at the county team playing that way. I think Pádraig Joyce was such a great forward himself. There is a sense, as Michael says, given Shane Walsh the captaincy, and a sense maybe that he'll be playing with more freedom. Really thrilling footballer to watch, great pace. I think it's going to be interesting to look at Monaghan under Banty, the sense that Malachy O'Rourke maybe got as much as there was to get out of them. I think they're 6 years in Division 1. I think Banty will be doing well to keep them in Division 1 this year. Mayo are the champions. I'm not sure they'll prioritise it this year. Tyrone looks like they're losing Carl McShane to Australia. Conor McCalliskey has opted out, I think. Matty Donnelly is injured. I think Mickey Hart will do well to keep Tyrone in Division 1 this year.
I find Galway interesting too. You look at Galway last year, Damien Comer didn't play a game for them until the second half of the Mayo match. So put him back in, and I think Galway can really kick on. Now I think he's had another surgical procedure in the meantime, so we should be seeing him back a lot earlier this year than last year. Be also interesting to see how does Pádraig Joyce integrate the Corofin players at this stage. He has them earlier than Kevin Walsh ever had them. Kevin Walsh probably brought on more Corofin players in his last year, and they did play some early league games, but now they have it in front of them completely. Be interesting to see. I'm not so sure that many Corofin players will actually make it. Liam Silk, Ian Burke, and after that it really is a guessing game to see who fits in. They really are unique in that regard, in that a lot of players at the same level, but who goes to the next level that can make a difference at inter-county level. And I think overall, I think this is Kerry's league to go and win, and to go and win some silverware again. They obviously won it in 2017 and didn't get the bounce from it, but there's a fresh set of players there. And I think to go and, first of all, beat Dublin in Croke Park on Saturday night, and then go and win a league title this year, should be obviously the immediate priority for them. It should mean more to them than maybe anybody else.
And what about Meath back in Division 1 for the first time in a long time? They fought so hard to get back there because they maybe saw it as a benchmark to kick on in the championship. Then they'll probably be up against it to stay up, but do you think they can?
They probably can. It's unlikely they will, because it's such a competitive division, and when you see the record of teams coming up from Division 2, the likelihood is that the same two teams go back down, and that's happened. Both teams twice in recent years, and other times one of the promoted teams has been relegated straight away. So there's a strong record of promoted teams not being able to hang on, and that's obviously against them. Having said that, they've got extra players back. There's obviously an attraction to play in Division 1, and their first two games are interesting because they're against Tyrone and Donegal, two teams that they've played quite a bit in recent years in Championship and in League, and haven't beaten them. They haven't beaten them, but they've been very, very close. So there comes a time in a team's cycle when you just really feel the need to go and beat a team, and they have them first up. First up is, for me, there's against Tyrone and Omagh, and then they have Donegal at home. And I think they'll really be targeting winning, obviously, both of those games, but they'll really look to hope to win one of those games on the basis of revenge, and that their time has come to go out and beat one of those two northern teams who have knocked them out of the championship in the last 3 years. It's been one of those two teams, Tyrone and Donegal, have well, obviously with the Super 8s, but they beat them in the Super 8s last year in Ballybuffet. So they have a record of going close but not beating both teams. I think that'll be on their mind.
The fight for survival will be seriously interesting. Colin mentioned there, Donegal are missing a load of bodies as well. Meath back up in Division 1 without Mickey Newman for, I think, until the summer by the looks of things as well. Monaghan with a new manager then as well. So there's going to be 3 or 4 teams really fighting there. If as Colm says, if Meath kind of hit the ground running, to give themselves a fighting chance of staying up. But the bottom half will be as interesting as the top half.
Yeah, and another league that's interesting, Vincent, let's look at Division 2 for a second. You know, there's no kind of obvious promotion candidate really. You had Donegal in there last year who looked, a cut above the rest. Maybe Galway, in the year previous also were quite strong. There's probably 3 or 4 teams who probably have eyes on maybe, getting promoted, and likewise, whoever drops down as well will be potentially in a B championship as well.
I think that's the most interesting part of Division 2, that the 2 teams that are relegated, if they don't make a provincial final, they don't make the All-Ireland qualifiers, and that's the real squeeze. And it extends down to Division 3 then, where you have Cork, which seems bizarre now for a team that ran Kerry so close in the Munster final last year. They have got to make damn sure that they get up, because if they don't get promoted, and I think that they're playing, is it in the semi-final to play Kerry in the Munster Championship?
So the chances are they will be.
They'll be in the second tier in the Championship. So that's the really interesting aspect to this to this National League.
I think the striking thing about Division 2 is the absentees, the number of players, top level players who are gone, and we're not just talking about. They are very much like Gary Brennan has been the heart and soul of Clare, and Clare has been a fantastic story under Colm Collins. They've come from Division 4, they got up to Division 2, and they've kept themselves there for the last 3 years. Since they've kept themselves there, but now Gary Brennan has gone. So too is Jamie Malone, who was an All-Star nominee last year, has been really good in the last 2 championships. That's just Clare. They're missing other players too. In Cavan, some of the best frontline players. Dara McVitie, who I thought was nearly come close to their best player, Killian Clark, is gone. In Laois, the Kingston brothers have both taken themselves out of the equation. So Ben McCormick has gone from Kildare, but I think he can be replaced in that respect. And I think Diarmuid Murtagh is probably considering weighing up not coming back either for Roscommon. So a lot of absentees in that division. I think Kildare will get a bounce with Jack O'Connor in charge there this year. And I also think Armagh could be lining up for a real shot at promotion. It looks like they have a settled team. Jamie Clark will be back in with them again. Obviously, Rian O'Neill was very good last year, and you'd expect him to push on with his brother Oisin, who has been in at midfield. So I give Kildare and Armagh a strong chance to progress here. I think absentees will catch out some of the other teams, but obviously at the other end, the desire to avoid the drop is more pressing than ever because of the consequences.
And Vincent mentioned that, Cork in Division 3 as well, which would have been maybe interesting in itself, but with that added kind of wrinkle of they really have to get promoted, or else they're facing the dreaded prospect of not being involved in the qualifiers. Yeah,
it looks like if there was any storm there that kind of weathered it last year. Like they were brilliant at times against Kerry in the Munster final. They were brilliant against Dublin for about 55 minutes in the first round of the Super 8s as well. So Ronan McCarthy kind of had a difficult first year. I would say a positive second year, and they're kind of building. There's an awful lot of optimism building down there as well, particularly with the underage results with the minors and the 20s winning All-Ireland last year as well. But there's pressure straight from the gun, so they're going to have to get wins on the board straight away. But I'd imagine they'd be a cut above, and I'd find it hard to see them. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they went unbeaten throughout Division 3, but there is big pressure, of course.
And lastly, just before we move on to the hurling preview, Vincent, obviously there's some rule changes as well that are coming in that are proving quite controversial without even the league starting. The advanced mark probably being the one getting the most focus. Where do you weigh in on it at this stage? I know it was trialled last year in the league and maybe didn't get as much focus because it wasn't going to be kept on. It is now being kept on, and a lot of inter-county players seem to be coming out against it already. Yeah, I mean, it was trialled last year, but the likes of Dublin didn't even use it in training. They knew it wasn't going to be part of the championship, so they didn't bother with it. I'm amazed at the amount of negativity towards it. It's as if it's almost been brought in over players' heads, which it hasn't been. I'd be inclined to wait and see. I do think it may make the game more stop-start. That'd be my concern, that
fellas just even catching a ball in the midriff and you get your free. And I'm not sure that makes sense to me. But I'd be inclined to give it time. I'm just, as I say, I'm a bit surprised that there's just such a volume of negativity towards it before we really see it.
I think fundamentally I don't see a great issue with it. The issue I see is how it's going to be policed. It's going to be very, very difficult for referees who are already overburdened, I feel, by the number of tasks that they have to perform. If you were to go through a catalogue of everything a referee has to do and their thought process now, it's actually frightening, everything that they have to check and make sure of. And now they are being asked to adjudicate as to whether a ball has travelled 20 metres, which could be in a direction where they're just not. They don't have a lateral view of it. So if they're looking at it from the wrong view, it's almost impossible for them to actually say, was that 20 metres? Was it more? If it's on the borderline. So that's going to be a real difficulty. Second of all, they have to compute straight away. Was it taken? Was the kick taken? Was it dispatched from outside the 45-metre line? That's going to be a challenge, and it's going to become a habit for them that's early on isn't going to be easy. So those two issues. The third thing is the player must put the hand up and signal the mark to get it. Now, there obviously has to be clarity about that this week to make sure that's what is expected from the player and that's what the referee is expecting too. So that has to be everything. I think the GA should come out and really clarify everything around the mark this week. If that's the case, what happens if the players can't get his arms up to signal a mark, and who can tell? And then you have a defender who's unsure, and if the defender stops and the player goes and it's an open goal, that's the other side of it too. So certainly won't be as seamless as the kick-out mark, which was very seamless. And a lot of the same scaremongering about the kick-out mark was there a few years ago, and it never manifested. It actually cleaned up the game considerably, that those rucks that developed and that the midfielder who caught the ball wasn't surrounded anymore. So the prize for actually getting yourself free and catching the ball was rewarded by a bit of freedom. And I think generally players who got what we might call cheap marks played on. They played on anyway. They had the space, they were in space, they got it on the chest, they played on. It'd be a lot different when you're inside the 45-metre line. And you see Conor McManus, one of the most clever players around, and last year he was drifting out into positions further out the field where he'd get into space, take it on his chest with short 20-25 metre kicks. And he's such a good kicker of points from his hands anyway, from a variety of angles, that it really benefited him, and he was one of the prime mark takers, as Tommy Walsh was.
Well, it just revitalised Tommy's career, because Tommy, since he came back from Australia, it really wasn't happening for him, but the mark changed everything for him. Yeah.
And ironically, I actually calculated what county scored from most marks last year after the league, and I'm nearly sure Dublin were tops. Ironically
really,
enough, yeah.
And they didn't practice. They basically didn't practice.
Yeah,
but
it's something I have to go back and check this week. But I'm almost certain it was Dublin who took most marks in last year's league.
Well, that's it for football. We'll now move on to our Allianz Hurling League preview. Even more so than maybe previous years with the new format, it's very difficult to kind of make a firm judgment at this stage. Like, it's been split into 1A and 1B. We have Galway, Cork, Tip, Limerick and Waterford in 1A, I think, along with Westmeath, is it? And then Kilkenny, Wexford, Clare, Dublin, Laois and Carlow in 1B. So I just say, we'll start with 1A then. There's a lot of it. You have Shane O'Neill coming in with Galway, the return of Kieran Kingston, Limerick coming back after some off-field issues in the off-season. Like, what county there is the one you're most interested in seeing?
Yeah, it's a peculiar league, because with the way the wherever counties finished last year, they were split into two pots. So essentially, you have a glorified Munster Championship in 1A and a glorified Leinster Championship in 1B. So having played each other in pre-season competition, most of those same teams are going to play each other again in the league, and then they're going to play each other again in Munster, which I don't know.
Even more of a phony war, maybe.
Yeah, I just thought it would have been better to mix and match and maybe not go on rankings in inverted commas. But 1A is very, very interesting. Yeah, Shane O'Neill came in with Galway, and some turmoil in Galway really over the winter, because I don't think anybody thought Micheál Donoghue was going to leave. By all accounts, he had said he was staying on, and it looked like plans were in place for 2020, and then there's all change. And I personally think they were right to bring in someone from outside, just given, I don't think there wasn't too many people in Galway putting their hands up by all accounts for the job anyway, so I think it was a shrewd enough move to go outside. Shane O'Neill, who we all know from being involved with the Pearse League, it's a tough enough job though, you know. There hasn't been that many new faces brought in recent years, so he'd probably feel compelled to bring in some more new faces. Whether those new faces are ready to usurp the more experienced names that we've seen in, like, they've been prominent the last 3 or 4 years, is questionable. He'll probably want to hit the ground running straight away, because I'd say he will. There is a bit of pressure on, particularly being an outsider there. Then you have Kieran Kingston coming back. By all accounts, he was the players' favourite, as Alan Cadigan said last week. The players went to Kieran Kingston to see would he come back, so he's coming back, having left at the end of 2017 due to pressure with work and business and that. So Cork have been kind of so hit and miss in league and championship, but particularly in league in the last couple of years. So I'm sure one of his primary goals is to try and get some consistency throughout the league, and I suppose dispel, I don't think it's a rumour or a myth at this stage, Cork are not an early season team, so I presume he'll be trying to harden them up and get some sort of a decent league run behind them. But that's a couple of interesting things. Obviously Brian Lohan coming in and Clare then as well. There's so many kind of new faces, and I'm just not sure how, Kilkenny aside, I'm not sure how serious a lot of teams will take the league this year.
Yeah, Vincent, what counties are you looking forward to seeing, or intrigued to see what they bring? You have a new manager, with Liam Cahill there in Waterford as well. There's a lot of new faces. Yeah,
I think Liam Cahill will certainly feel he has a point to prove, maybe, that 2 years ago he was one of the front runners for the senior job, and then Liam Sheedy came back in, like, to win back-to-back All-Irelands at under 21 and under 20 level with Tip, and then step into a Waterford job that I think Pádraig Fanning, if you look at the league coming out of last year's league, Waterford seemed to be in good enough shape. They put 31 points on Clare in a quarter final. They came back against Galway in that semi-final in Nolan Park to a game that in hindsight had a huge impact on the championship because of Joe Canning's injury. And they were beaten by Limerick then in the league final. But I would have thought that Waterford felt they were in reasonably good shape coming out of the league. And that's the big question mark that you have to ask yourself. Because the championship structure is in itself a league, I think the National League now is almost just staring into the depth of your panel. And if you look at Tipperary in last year's league, they really didn't show much. I think they were clearly in a heavy training load. Their one performance in the league was, I think, in their final group match. They went down to Cork and they hammered Cork. They'd lost 3 of their previous 4 matches. They then went into the quarter-final against Dublin and were beaten and didn't seem particularly bothered. And by the time they got the Munster Championship going, they were in unbelievably good shape. And I think the serious hurling teams will be doing something like that. They'll have looked at what Sheedy did. I was amazed, personally, that Tip won the All-Ireland last year with essentially the old guard. They now have back-to-back under-21, under-20 champions, and I think that will be Liam Sheedy's priority in this league, to get the likes of Mark Keogh or Jake Morris or maybe Brian McGrath into this senior team and to add something to the All-Ireland champions. They won the All-Ireland last year without Bonner Maher, essentially. I think that's been largely forgotten. I think if you were asked who is the player that Tip can least afford to lose to injury, it would have been either Shamie Callanan or Bonner Maher. They lost Bonner Maher in the Limerick game in the group stages, and yet they went and they came and they won the All-Ireland in the end. Bonner Maher, my information is he's absolutely way ahead of schedule. Typical guy, doesn't drink, looks after himself. So I think Liam will certainly be looking for additions to the kind of the starting 15 that they had. Obviously, we won't be seeing the Dan McCormacks or the Brendan Mars for the foreseeable future. They need a rest badly. But I think there'll be a lot of phony stuff going on in this league. First game, Limerick, they've won the Munster League already. I think people have been talking about social media and the impact on that team, but you have to remember they're the reigning champions. They're the reigning Munster champions. They lost one significant game last year. I think they'll be furious with themselves for being caught cold by Kilkenny in the semi-final, the first 25 minutes last year. They'll be on a mission, I think, to I'd say John Kiley will be looking for more bodies as well, just to get a message across to the established lads. This isn't set in stone, our starting 15.
Yeah, just on Limerick, Colm, because after they won the All-Ireland and they were praised so much for how they handled that off-season, they weren't really, very visible at all. And then it was kind of the opposite this year. After losing in the All-Ireland semi-final, there was a lot of off-field stories. So, as Vince says, John Kyle will probably want to, get back to focusing on hurling with a couple of early results so people kind of forget about what, some of these incidents.
I think he'll try and shake things up for sure. Well, I think even within, he'll try and create more competition for places, and I think he should, because they were pretty settled last year. Now, he did integrate players in. Players like Paddy O'Loughlin came through. So there were players used extensively. They were very impressive in last year's league. They went down to Nolan Park and blitzed Kilkenny. And in the final against Limerick, you just thought against Waterford that day that they were close to untouchable. Having struggled a little bit against Dublin in Nolan Park, they really, against Waterford, they were so impressive. And recovered well after that defeating to Cork in the Championship. And that day against Tipperary, you just could not see beyond them. And as Vincent said, they were just caught by a classic Kilkenny trap last July in the All-Ireland semi-final. Those first 15 minutes, frenzied Kilkenny swarmed around them and really took them out of it. And Limerick had plenty of opportunities to actually get back and win that game. So the idea that they fell off a cliff or anything like that last year just isn't there. They are right there. I think ultimately, I still think they will be the team to beat throughout the league and throughout the championship this year. If you take last year's Munster final as the benchmark, and I don't see why we shouldn't, even though Tipperary have gone on to win the All-Ireland final, that day they just couldn't get near them. But for Brendan Maher was so good, and we mentioned him at the outset, how good he has been for Borrisoleigh. So be interested to see what players John Kiley pushes through. They of course have a lot of talent still from those two All-Ireland under-21 winning teams, who are probably just a little bit more mature and advanced than the two Tipperary teams. So the integration of them will be very interesting. I would like to see what Brian Lohan can get out of Clare too, because obviously Clare have struggled really since 2013. Obviously in between they won a league, but a lot of those players won an All-Ireland title very early in their careers and just haven't followed it up. So someone like Lohan now coming in who will be straight talking and will have a clear idea of how he wants to play, because he was not an advocate or a fan of the way Davy Fitzgerald played, and was on the record and saying that, and was quite vocal about that. So now he has his opportunity to impose his own type of play, what he feels is best for Clare, and you would suspect it would be a more direct style. So interesting too to see how Clare go.
Just on that, Peter Duggan's absence is huge, isn't it? Particularly if they're going
really
wanting to
if you're looking
direct,
for more direct, and he's gone.
You
so
know,
that's a huge issue.
That's a bit of a killer.
And the suspicion is that Clare and Waterford just fell away from the pack in Munster last year. That they were that like the beatings that came their way from the bigger three were so heavy that it will be hard for them to claw back, even for Waterford too. And Waterford now missing Philip Mahoney, he's retired, and Noel Connors has been left to one side. So
like the Burke is cruciate as well. He won't
coming
be back
from
to the
Cruciate.
championship.
So they have
as
a
well,
lot of personnel issues, and maybe Waterford aren't delivering the flow of players that Tipperary, Cork and Limerick have either. I think at underage level, that's pretty obvious. So they'll be looking certainly to introduce players over the next few weeks. But are they there? Suspicion is maybe they're not.
And to look at some of the Leinster counties in 1B, Vincent, with Kilkenny, the Ballyhale guys won't be around for the first couple of weeks. So I guess if you want to look on the positive for Brian Cody, a chance to maybe further explore his panel and look at some other new faces. But when TJ Reid, Colin Fennelly, guys like this aren't in their team, they're considerably weaker. So it could be a tough campaign.
It could be a tough campaign, but I think we were talking here exactly a year ago about the possibility of them being relegated or whatever. And, Cody keeps surprising us. And I remember doing a podcast with Michael down in Kilkenny before the All-Ireland quarter-final against Cork. And the level of pessimism in the audience down there was astonishing. And one of the questions that we were asked was, is it time for Cody to go? And you're just thinking, how can people ask that? Like they were league champions the previous year, and they keep surprising us. And what they did to Limerick was the classic Kilkenny trap. And you're kind of thinking that the way Limerick won the Munster final against Tip, where Brian Hogan made about 5 spectacular saves to keep Tip in it, where you had Brendan Marr marking Aaron Gallan, doing as good a job on Gallan as is possible to do, and yet Tip were beaten by 12 points. And it could have been 24 points. And you're thinking, my God, there's nobody going to stop that Limerick team. And the thing that stood out about Limerick that day was their physicality. They're such a big, powerful team, and their ability to transition the ball through the field without taking chances. And then they walk into Brian Cody's Kilkenny, a Kilkenny team that has been held together by elastoplast, basically, in recent years. And Kilkenny just stunned them. Out of the blocks, 1-7 to 2 points in no time. And they did it by just hitting them with a ferocity that Limerick were taken aback by. So I'm giving up on making predictions about Brian Cody and Kilkenny. I think they could do anything. Davy Fitz, very interesting. He's staying another year. They've won the Walsh Cup. Just a real sense of positivity about Wexford. If they can find 1 or 2 new players, I think they're the one unbeaten team in last year's Leinster Championship. But bear in mind, 4 teams finished on 5 points in last year's Leinster Championship. Leinster hurling has never been more competitive or tighter, and it could have been very different if Joe Canning was fit last year. So I think the Leinster counties they'll all feel they have a chance.
Just on Wexford and Davy, funnily enough, they're going to be missing probably their 3 best players for the early rounds of the league. Matt O'Hanlon's a knee injury. Dermot O'Keefe is away and I think only coming back in the coming weeks. And Lee Chin is only getting back training now as well. And I actually don't think it's a bad thing, because they're going to have to get at least 3 or 4 new faces in. I didn't think they'd win the Walsh Cup the other day, but because there's so many new faces involved, they managed to pull through there. I don't think he'll be too bothered about finishing first or second, but honest, which I don't think a lot of teams will be. I think 3rd, 4th or 5th would be a grand place to finish and find new faces. Brian Cody last year, because Ballyhale went so long they didn't come back basically till April, so he had to play the whole league without 2 or 3 of his best forwards, particularly TJ and Colin Fennelly. So he's able to find new faces, and I think Davy's going to be forced to find new faces now, and those new faces the benefits of that will only be seen in June, July and August. So I think it's actually a good thing that they're going to have to find some new guys.
And what do you think? Where do you think Dublin are at the moment? Obviously, their championship ended extremely disappointingly last year, losing to Laois, especially after beating Galway and knocking them out. Shortly before that, they come in kind of under the radar. No one was really kind of talking about them. We were focusing on some of the other bigger teams. But where do you think they are under Matty Kenny at the moment?
Yeah, I still think they're in a very good position. They were obviously shell shocked last year after the Laois game. Kind of maybe something that wasn't really said at the time, that they were missing a lot of guys that day. Like Owen O'Donnell was in the 26th, but obviously I don't know if he was fit to play or not, but he played no part, and they had 3 or 4 other significant injuries that day. They have obviously hopefully a fit Mark Shute back. It looks like Conal Keeney's going to be back, and it looks like Donald Burke, who's a very exciting forward, is going to be back as well. I still think they have 24 or 25 players that can make them really, really competitive. I thought they were kind of dark horses last year. The whole year basically was a disaster in senses because of the Laois game. Funnily enough, I don't think Tip would have fancied playing them in a quarter final if they had faced them. But I still think Dublin are maybe Dublin are the sort of team that would take the league maybe even a bit more seriously than most because of the way last year finished. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they were in the last 4.
The format is probably what the managers were crying out for, because the league had become very cutthroat in recent years with relegation, playoff, and nobody wanted to be dropping, even the psychology of being relegated. So there is a little with the divisions being mixed up. There is a bit of leeway there, and that's what the likes of Davy Fitzgerald has been advocating for a number of years now, so that they could actually integrate more players. I think they'll all welcome that. I think we won't see the best from anyone until the latter stages. There'll be no one in the hurling league certainly putting their foot to the floor very early on.
With the best will in the world, the relegation playoff looks like it's Carlow Westmeath already, doesn't it? It's very hard to see it otherwise. I do think Dublin, no more than Limerick and in the semi-final of the championship last year, I think Dublin will be furious with themselves over what happened against Laois. They were not in my opinion, psychologically ready for what Laois threw at them. And Laois have great hurlers, and when Laois get a run at you, you better be ready for it. And I think they will be on a mission. I mean, they got to the semi-finals of the league last year. I think Matty Kenny will want them to do something similar and just build up the strength of that team. From 2 to 7, I think Dublin are as good as there is in hurling. They need to get a forward line that gets goals and that has a real potent threat to it. But they'll be on a mission in this league, I think.
We might finish up with quick predictions, guys. Might go around, starting with you, Michael. As football league champions in Division 1 and hurling league champions in Division 1.
Football league champions, probably echo what Colm said. I'd say Kerry, as Colm said, was their last 8. They've only won one of their last 8 games in Croke Park.
Yeah.
I think setting out on Saturday night, it's important for them probably to get a victory. No more than I think it was important for them to beat Dublin in the league last year. So they're one of the teams that I think will be like there's too many kind of question marks in inverted commas over Dublin, and there'll be a lot of transition during the league. I'd say someone like a Kerry probably in football. In hurling, I think just because of the winter that they went through, I think Limerick will be not putting the foot to the floor, but Limerick will be one of the teams that will be more consistent, I'd say, throughout the league than others. So Limerick and Kerry for me.
Vincent?
I'm going to go for Galway. I think Pádraig Joyce and Galway may have a right crack at this league. I think Joyce will want early momentum. I think Kerry, I would agree with what Colm said earlier, that Kerry kind of need to win this first game, because to come away with a defeat to Dublin in the circumstances Dublin are starting this league in would be, I think it's not what Peter Keane needs. So I think it is an important game for them. But I'll go for Galway to win the football.
And the hurling?
In the hurling, I'd nearly go for Galway as well. I think Shane O'Neill, wants to make an early impact. I don't think Tip will go for it. Possibly Limerick. I think Limerick as defending champions, John Kiley, because of some of what's gone on, with the trip to New York and that, I think he'll be laying down a marker to certain people. I think they'll be on the best of behaviour. Their opening game against Tip, I would fancy Limerick to win it in Thurles, and Limerick or Galway for me.
And Colm?
Well, I've already said Kerry. I think there's an imperative there for them to win Saturday night and then go on and win it out. So I say Kerry there. Division 1, I agree with Vincent. I think Galway are well placed. They need something now to really drive them on. And I think under new management, they've a cause there. So I think Galway and Limerick will fight it out for a league final ultimately up the line. I think Kildare Armagh, the football will come up through the divisions. I also think Cork will survive and thrive and go on into Division 2 with Derry possibly. So that's the way I see it.
Well, plenty to look forward to over the next few months, lads. Michael, Vincent, Colm, thanks so much for coming in.
Cheers, Will.
Cheers, Will.
That's all we have time for on the Throne this week in association with Allianz. We will be back next week reviewing all the action from the first weekend of the football and hurling leagues. And in the meantime, you could subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next week, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.